Once upon a time, there was a young boy and a young girl who were attending an awful boarding school. And the story opens on a rainy day out in the playground. They're being chased by bullies. The teachers are overly permissive and not particularly interested in justice. And so the bullies mostly run the school. And this boy, Eustace Scrubb, and this girl, Jill Pole, are struggling to get away from these bullies who are coming after them. They're looking for an escape. Eustace, from previous stories, has miraculously stepped into another world, another dimension, with some of his cousins, a place called Narnia, where there are adventures and good and evil battles, as it does in our world, but in a more medieval sort of way, with kings and castles and dragons. And the children enter a time differential whereby they're allowed to grow up for years, growing in wisdom, becoming adults, but then they're whisked back to their world, back to their childhood, back to Earth, and have to keep on growing as children. And that could be a little challenging. But the author is laying out some great truths and insights here in these few pages that we'll be reading. So we'll be looking for those. Back to Eustace and Jill. They're climbing up a hill at this point, hoping to get through the door in an old gate. And it's always locked. There's been rumors every once in a while it's been opened, so they're desperate, scrambling. Jill's been crying, and they're both dirty, climbing up this hill with bullies behind. And Eustace reaches out his hand for this door, hoping that it'll be open so they can get out of the play yard. And this is where we pick up our story. "It's sure to be no good," said Eustace with his hand on the handle. And then, oh, for the handle turned and the door opened. A moment before, both of them had meant to get through that doorway in double time quick, if by any chance the door was not locked. But when the door actually opened, they both stood stock still, for what they saw was quite different from what they had expected. They had expected to see the gray, heathery slope of the moor going up and up to join the dull autumn sky. Instead, a blaze of sunshine met them. It poured through the doorway as the light of a June day pours into a garage when you open the door. It made the drops of water on the grass glitter like beads and showed up the dirtiness of Jill's tear-stained face. And the sunlight was coming from what certainly did look like a different world, what they could see of it. They saw smooth turf, smoother and brighter than Jill had ever seen before, and blue sky, and darting to and fro things so bright that they might have been jewels or huge butterflies. Although she had been longing for something like this, Jill felt frightened. She looked at Scrubb's face and saw that he was frightened too. "Come on, Pole," he said in a breathless voice. "Can we get back?" "Is it safe?" asked Jill. At that moment, a voice shouted from behind, a mean, spiteful little voice. "Now then, Pole," it squeaked. "Everyone knows you're there. Down you come." It was the voice of Edith Jackal, not one of the main bullies herself, but one of their hangers-on and talebearers. "Quick," said Scrubb. "Here, hold hands. We mustn't get separated." And before she quite knew what was happening, he had grabbed her hand and pulled her through the door, out of the school grounds, out of England, out of our whole world, into that place. The sound of Edith Jackal's voice stopped as suddenly as the voice on a radio when it is switched off. Instantly, there was quite a different sound all about them. It came from those bright things overhead, which now turned out to be birds. They were making a riotous noise, but It was much more like music, rather advanced music, which you don't quite take in at first hearing, than bird songs ever are in our world. Yet in spite of the singing, there was a sort of background of immense silence. That silence combined with the freshness of the air made Jill think that they must be on the top of a very high mountain. Scrub still had her by the hand, and they were walking forward, staring about them on every side. Jill saw that huge trees, rather like cedars but bigger, grew in every direction. But as they did not grow close together, and as there was no undergrowth, this did not prevent one from seeing a long way into the forest, to left and right. As far as Jill's eye could reach, it was all the same level turf, darting birds with yellow or dragonfly blue or rainbow plumage, blue shadows, and emptiness. There was not a breath of wind in that cool, bright air. It was a very lonely forest. Right ahead, there were no trees, only blue sky. They went straight on without speaking till suddenly Jill heard Scrub say, "Look out!" and felt herself jerked back. They were at the very edge of a cliff. Jill was one of those lucky people who have a good head for heights. She didn't mind in the least standing on the edge of a precipice. She was rather annoyed with Scrub for pulling her back. "Just as if I was a kid," she said, and wrenched her hand out of his. When she saw how very white he had turned, she despised him. "What's the matter?" she said, and to show that she was not afraid, she stood very near the edge indeed. In fact, a good deal nearer than even she might have liked. Then she looked down. She now realized that Scrub had some excuse for looking white, for no cliff in our world is to be compared with this. Imagine yourself at the top of the very highest cliff you know, and imagine yourself looking down to the very bottom, and then imagine that the precipice goes on below that as far again, 10 times as far, 20 times as far. And when you've looked down all that distance, imagine little white things that might at first glance be mistaken for sheep, but presently you realize that they are clouds. Not little wreaths of mist, but the enormous white puffy clouds which are themselves as big as most mountains. And at last, in between those clouds, you get your first glimpse of the real bottom, so far away that you can't make out whether it's field or wood or land or water. Further below those clouds than you are above them. Jill stared at it. Then she thought that perhaps after all she would take a step or back or a foot or so from the ledge. But she didn't like to for fear of what Scrub would think. Then she suddenly decided that she didn't care what he thought and that she would jolly well get away from that horrible edge and never laugh at anyone for not liking heights again. But when she tried to move, she found she couldn't. Her legs seemed to have turned into putty. Everything was swimming before her eyes. "What are you doing, Pole? Come back!" shouted Scrub. But his voice seemed to be coming from a long way off. She felt him grabbing at her, but by now she had no control over her arms and legs. There was a moment's struggling on the cliff. Jill was too frightened and dizzy to know quite what she was doing. But two things she remembered as long as she lived. They often came back to her in dreams. One was that she had wrenched herself free from Scrub's clutches. The other was that at the same moment Scrub himself, with a terrified scream, had lost his balance and gone hurtling to the depths. Fortunately, she was given no time to think over what she had done. Some huge, brightly colored animal had rushed to the edge of the cliff. It was lying down, leaning over, and this was the odd thing, blowing. Not roaring or snorting, but just blowing from its wide-opened mouth, blowing out as steadily as a vacuum cleaner sucks in. Jill was lying so close to the creature that she could feel the breath vibrating steadily through its body. She was lying still because she couldn't get up. She was nearly fainting. Indeed, she wished she could really faint, but faints don't come for the asking. At last she saw far away below her a tiny black speck floating away from the cliff and slightly upwards. As it rose, it also got further away. By the time it was nearly on a level with the cliff top, it was so far off that she lost sight of it. It was obviously moving away from them at a great speed. Jill couldn't help thinking that the creature at her side was blowing it away. So she turned and looked at the creature. It was a lion. Without a glance at Jill, the lion rose to its feet and gave one last blow. Then, as if satisfied with its work, it turned and stalked slowly away, back into the forest. It must be a dream. It must, Jill said to herself. I'll wake up in a moment. But it wasn't, and she didn't. I do wish we'd never come to this dreadful place, Jill said. I don't believe Scrub knew any more about it than I do. Or if he did, he had no business to bring me here without warning me what it was like. It's not my fault he fell over that cliff. If he'd left me alone, we should both be all right. But then she remembered again the scream that Scrub had given when he fell, and burst into tears. Crying is all right in a way while it lasts, but you have to sooner or later stop, and you still have to decide what to do. When Jill stopped, she found she was dreadfully thirsty. She had been lying face downward, and now she sat up. The birds had ceased singing, and there was perfect silence except for one small persistent sound which seemed to come from a good distance away. She listened carefully and felt almost sure it was the sound of running water. Jill got up and looked round very carefully. There was no sign of the lion, but there were so many trees about that it might easily be quite close without her seeing it. For all she knew, there might be several lions. But her thirst was very bad now, and she plucked up her courage to go and look for that running water. She went on tiptoes, stealing cautiously from tree to tree and stopping to peer around her at every step. The wood was so still that it was not difficult to decide where the sound was coming from. It grew clearer every moment, and sooner than she expected she came to an open glade and saw the stream, bright as glass, running across the turf, a stone's throw away from her. But although the sight of the water made her feel 10 times thirstier than before, she didn't rush forward and drink. She stood as still as if she had been turned into stone, with her mouth wide open, and she had a very good reason. Just on this side of the stream lay the lion. It lay with its head raised and its 2 forepaws out in front. She knew at once that it had seen her, for its eyes looked straight into hers for a moment, and then turned away, as if it knew her quite well, and didn't think much of her. If I run away, it'll be after me in a moment, Jill thought. And if I go on, I shall run straight into its mouth. Anyway, she couldn't have moved if she had tried, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. How long this lasted, she could not be sure. It seemed like hours, and the thirst became so bad that she almost felt she would not mind being eaten by the lion if only she could be sure of getting a mouthful of water first. If you're thirsty, you may drink. They were the first words she had heard since Scrub had spoken to her on the edge of the cliff. For a second, she stared here and there, wondering who had spoken. Then the voice said again, "If you are thirsty, come and drink." And of course, she remembered what Scrub had said about animals talking in that other world, and realized that it was the lion speaking. Anyway, she had seen its lips move this time, and the voice was not like a man's. It was deeper, wilder, stronger, a sort of heavy, golden voice. It did not make her any less frightened than she had been before, but it made her frightened in rather a different way. "Are you not thirsty?" said the lion. "I'm dying of thirst," said Jill. "Then drink," said the lion. Would you mind going away while I do?" said Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. And as Jill gazed at its motionless bulk, she realized that she might as well have asked the whole mountain to move aside for her convenience. The delicious rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. "Will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come?" said Jill. "I make no promise," said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now that, without noticing it, she had come a step nearer. Do you eat girls? She said. I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms, said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boasting, nor as if it were sorry, nor as if it were angry. It just said it. I daren't come and drink, said Jill. Then you will die of thirst, said the lion. Oh dear, said Jill, coming another step nearer. I suppose I must go and look for another stream then. There is no other stream, said the lion. It never occurred to Jill to disbelieve the lion. No one who had seen his stern face could do that, and her mind suddenly made itself up. It was the worst thing she had ever had to do. But she went forward to the stream, knelt down, and began scooping up water in her hand. It was the coldest, most refreshing water she had ever tasted. You didn't need to drink much of it, for it quenched your thirst at once. Before she tasted it, she had been intending to make a dash away from the lion the moment she had finished. Now she realized that this would be, on the whole, the most dangerous thing of all. She got up and stood there with her lips still wet from drinking. Come here, said the lion, and she had to. She was almost between its front paws now, looking straight into its face. But she couldn't stand that for long, so she dropped her eyes. Human child, said the lion. Where is the boy? He fell over the cliff, said Jill, and added, Sir. She didn't know what else to call him, and it sounded impolite to call him nothing. How did he come to do that, human child? He was trying to stop me from falling, sir. Why were you so near the edge, human child? I was showing off, sir. That is a very good answer, human child. Do so no more. And now, here for the first time the lion's face became a little less stern. The boy is safe. I have blown him to Narnia. But your task will be the harder because of what you have done. Please, what task, sir? Said Jill. The task for which I called you and him here, out of your own world. This puzzled Jill very much. It's mistaking me for someone else, she thought. She didn't dare to tell the lion this, though she felt things would get into a dreadful muddle unless she did. Speak your thought, human child, said the lion. I was wondering, could there be some mistake? Because nobody called me and Scrub, you know. It was we who asked to come here. Scrub said we were to call to somebody. It was a name I wouldn't know. And perhaps the somebody would let us in. And we did, and then we found the door open. You would not have called to me unless I had been calling to you, said the lion. Then you are the somebody, sir? Said Jill. I am. And now hear your task. Far from here in the land of Narnia there lives an aged king who is sad because he has no prince of his blood to be king after him. He has no heir because his only son was stolen from him many years ago, and no one in Narnia knows where that prince went or whether he is still alive. But he is. I lay on you this command, that you seek this lost prince until either you have found him and brought him to his father's house, or else died in the attempt, or else gone back into your own world. How, please? Said Jill. I will tell you, child, said the lion. These are the signs by which I will guide you in your quest. First, as soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old and dear friend. He must greet that friend at once. If he does, you will both have good help. Second, you must journey out of Narnia to the north still, till you come to the ruined city of the ancient giants. Third, you shall find a writing on a stone in that ruined city, and you must do what the writing tells you. Fourth, you will know the lost prince, if you find him, by this, that he will be the first person you have met in your travels who will ask you to do something in my name, in the name of Aslan. As the lion seemed to have finished, Jill thought she should say something, so she said, Thank you very much, I see. Child, said Aslan, in a gentler voice than he had yet used. "Perhaps you do not see quite as well as you think. But the first step is to remember. Repeat to me in order the 4 signs." Jill tried and didn't get them quite right, so the lion corrected her and made her repeat them again and again until she could plainly say them perfectly. He was very patient over this, so that when it was done, Jill plucked up courage to ask, "Please, how am I to get to Narnia?" "On my breath," said the lion. "I will blow you into the west of the world as I blew Eustace." "Shall I catch him in time to tell him the first sign? But I suppose it won't matter. If he sees an old friend, he's sure to go and speak to him, isn't he?" "You will have no time to spare," said the lion. "That is why I must send you at once. Come, walk before me to the edge of the cliff." Jill remembered very well that if there was no time to spare, that it was her own fault. If I hadn't made such a fool of myself, Scrub and I would have been going together, and he'd have heard all the instructions as well as me, she thought. So she did as she was told. It was very alarming walking back to the edge of the cliff, especially as the lion did not walk with her but behind her, making no noise on his soft paws. But long before she had got anywhere near the edge, the voice behind her said, "Stand still. In a moment I will blow. But first remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning, and when you lie down at night, and when you wake in the middle of the night. And whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And secondly, I give you a warning. Here on the mountain I have spoken to you clearly. I will not often do so down in Narnia. Here on the mountain the air is clear, and your mind is clear. As you drop down into Narnia, the air will thicken. Take great care that it does not confuse your mind. And the signs which you have learned here will not look at all as you expect them to look when you meet them there. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and pay no attention to appearances. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else matters. And now, daughter of Eve, farewell." The voice had been growing softer towards the end of the speech, and now it faded away altogether. Jill looked behind her. To her astonishment, she saw the cliff already more than 100 yards behind her, and the lion himself a speck of bright gold on the edge of it. She had been setting her teeth and clenching her fists for a terrible blast of the lion's breath, but the breath had really been so gentle that she had not even noticed the moment at which she left the earth. And now there was nothing but air for thousands upon thousands of feet below her.